Road Trip, Chapter 20. My rubbery legs were slowing me down, almost on the verge of collapsing, pushing me through the pain using every last ounce of energy. I could hear the tracker getting closer. Somehow, Mike and I were separated, and my gun wasn't on me. I was too exhausted to turn around and use my powers. The deeper I went in the woods, the more disoriented I felt, screaming for Mike's help, but he was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, my legs gave up, and the tracker jumped on my back, causing me to fall straight on the dirt. He flipped me around. Oh no, it wasn't a tracker. It was Jasper. He reached for my neck, squeezing my throat with both hands as I gasped for air, trying to pull his fingers off with what little strength I had left as he continued to press harder. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Help!" but nothing came out. Jasper leaned down into my face with his beaming red eyes. "Stop fighting it, Amber," he declared. "You shouldn't have defied me, but now your time is up." He leaned back and shook me vigorously. I was kicking my legs, but they felt weighed down from him sitting on me. My powers were useless, so I shut my eyes, dreading that I may not survive this. As I gave my best shot to yell, the sound of my voice faded away and only my lips were moving. I took my last breath of oxygen. My life was over. "I'm sorry, baby, but I have no fight left in me." The end was approaching, all because I wasn't strong enough. Why was this happening? Why? Accepting the defeat, all because I was weak, not even strong enough to keep this baby alive. I slowly opened my eyes, convinced angels would be waiting to lead me to the heavens, but someone hovered over me, shaking me. "Amber, breathe. Amber." I took a big breath of air as Mike was attempting to awaken me from a horrible nightmare. I was still panicking, struggling to focus on where I was. My heart raced and the sheets were soaked. I struggled to breathe. A tear dropped from my cheek. Mike hugged me as I squeezed him tight. "Hey, I'm right here. You're safe," he said. His energy soothed the horror I was feeling. My heart rate returned to normal and I could breathe again. The fear was no longer as I came back to reality and recognized the cot I was sitting on. The dream catcher hanging above me moved ever so slightly. I pulled myself away from him. Even the dream catcher wasn't strong enough to keep Jasper out of my dreams. "Thank you," I said. He adjusted my necklace. After about 3 minutes of silence, he finally spoke. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jasper choked me. I couldn't breathe. I sobbed, placing my hands around my neck. My powers were useless. I lost my gun. "Do you think it was a premonition?" Mike asked. "Maybe. I don't know. I didn't recognize this dream." I gazed into his eyes. It felt so real, like he was in my head. Jasper's powers of mind control were stronger than I thought. What if he was tapping into my thoughts while I was dreaming? This questioned if he was more powerful than me. Mike smiled at me. "What?" I asked. He reached for my knife that was on the table beside the cot. "Here," he said as he handed it to me. "If that bastard is choking you, stab him in the heart." His enthusiastic smile filled me with hope. He always knew what to say to make me feel safe. I gave him a gentle kiss, wiped the tears off my face, and stood up to compose myself. "Let's get ready for this trip." After I showered and changed into normal clothing, Mike and I gathered the AK-47s and extra clips. Once we were all packed for the trip, we headed to the front of the camp to wait for Zeke. Evan came walking over with his backpack and an AR-15. He seemed prepared for a fight. Right behind him was Zeke. "Where are you going?" I asked Evan. "With you all," Evan replied. Mike and I looked at each other uncertainly. "I figured you could use an extra hand in case you encountered trackers." Evan paused as we stared at him. "I'm not staying here," he demanded. "I need to keep my mind off Alex, so don't try and tell me." I cut him off as I put my hand on his shoulder. "Evan, it's fine." I nodded. "You can come." He nodded back and whispered, "Thanks." I looked at the boys. "Everyone ready?" "Yep," Zeke said while holding his AKM. Once we got to the Camaro, we loaded all the equipment into the trunk. It was good to be prepared in case we encountered trackers. Mike and I sat in the back while Zeke drove us. Evan didn't say a word, staring out the passenger window. The only sound was the humming of the air conditioner and the raw, steady noise coming from the engine. "Can we have some music?" I asked. Zeke turned on the radio and our favorite band was playing, Linkin Park. I reached for Mike's hand, his smile reassuring. After an hour, we finally arrived at the college. I needed to stretch my legs from the tight squeeze in the back. It wasn't exactly the roomiest. The air was warm today and the sun was very bright. I redid my hair into a high ponytail to allow my neck to breathe. My uncle should be in the library, Zeke mentioned. Hopefully, this was one step closer to getting answers. I wanted to ask Mr. Emerson so many questions, but I wasn't even sure where to begin. Worried he may not know anything, making this trip a waste of time. I rubbed Alex's bracelet as I told myself that she gave me his name for a reason. He had to know something about Jasper and possibly know more about who I was. Every step we made toward the library was making me nervous. I reached up for my necklace with my right hand, and Mike held my other, keeping my fear from spiking. Outside the library was a sign for Marshall Hamilton Library. We walked through the sliding glass door, and inside were large rows of shelves filled with thousands of books. It reminded me of the times I would visit our local library on a rainy day. As we approached the front desk, a young lady who appeared to be a student had a friendly smile. "How can I help you?" she asked in a soft tone. "Hi, I'm looking for Professor Gary Emerson," Zeke said. "Is he here by chance?" "Yes, he is in a meeting in the conference room, which is located at the back of the library." She read her watch on her wrist. "He should be finishing up shortly if you would like to wait around for him. Are you a student?" "No, he's my uncle." "Oh, okay, he shouldn't be too much longer. Browse around if you like. Just remember to keep quiet," she whispered. "No problem," he responded. I walked around mesmerized by the hundreds of books filled with knowledge and creative fiction stories, thinking how nice it would have been to be reading a fantasy fiction novel in the warm sun, sitting next to Mike in our beach chairs. I daydreamed, listening to the waves crashing against the shore and the sound of seagulls screeching. I took a deep breath to smell the mixture of salty sea air and seaweed in my nose, feeling the grainy sensation of sand between my toes, while the gentle breeze blew through my long hair. The bright sun felt warm on my white skin, soaking in the energy. While walking down one of the back aisles and continuing to daydream of how our vacation should have played out, something caught my attention, bringing me back to reality. Down the way, a gleaming bright light pierced my eyes. I squinted to push through the pane and stepped closer toward the orange beam. The closer I got, the brighter it became. But once I was within reaching distance, the glowing stopped. Up on the top shelf was a book sticking out slightly over the edge. The sun shone through the window, causing a glare on the spine of the book. I reached up for the book. On the front cover was a picture of a tree with orange leaves and large roots. The title was Below the Roots, which was an unusual placement for it, but unique at the same time. Fearless. Love begins where the roots end. "Excellent choice," an older gentleman said with a raspy voice. In front of me stood a fairly tall man, possibly in his late 60s, with short gray hair and stubble all over his face as if he hadn't groomed in a week. He had both hands tucked in his pockets. I glanced down at the book in my hand to see the author's name, Gary Emerson. Zeke came rushing past me. "Uncle Gary," Zeke said with excitement. "Zeke," they hugged each other. "I barely recognized you. Last time I saw you, you were yay high. What have you been up to?" "It's been a long time. Uncle Gary, I'd like you to meet my friends, Mike, Evan, and Amber." He shook Evan and Mike's hands. Then he reached his hand out to shake mine. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Emerson," I said. Call me Gary." He grabbed the book out of my hand and stared at the bracelet Alex had given me. "A few weeks ago, a young lady about your age stopped by to ask me questions about this book. She had the same bracelet. Oh, what was her name? Ashley? Amy?" Evan looked at me. "Alex?" he said. "Yes, Alex was her name. You know her?" he asked. We all went silent. Zeke spoke up for us. Uncle, there was an accident." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," he said with disappointment. He leaned back on the table, still holding the book with his head lowered. "Wonderful young lady, a little headstrong. She started rambling about stuff that made no sense to me. Before I could walk away, she stopped me. She said it was important I talk to her about this book." "Why was she interested in this book?" Evan asked. "Well," he paused, "not particularly this book, but the next book after this one. The only problem was, it was never written." He continued to stare at the front cover as he held it up. "This was one of my first books ever written. It is a fictional Greek mythology story of the seven sisters of Pleiades, mostly focused on the goddess Electra. Now he had my attention. Fearless was to become a book series, but not many took a liking to my story. It didn't line up with the legends that have been told for centuries. People thought my version was flawed and uncanny. It's amazing how a fantasy fiction novel can be put down by those who don't have an imagination or hunger for creativity in the mythical realms. He stopped himself from continuing his rant. I'm sorry, he apologized. I'm getting off topic at hand. Alex was desperate to know what happens next, hoping I had at least had a manuscript, but I didn't write it. She seemed dispirited by this. Poor Alex came here in hopes of answers and got nothing. Why would she be so sure I could get anything out of him? I tried explaining to her that it is just a fictional story. I offered it to others to read that I have written, but she only wanted to know more on this one. Thank you, Evan said. Anything else you can tell us about our visit? Mr. Emerson shook his head. No, that's it. Thank you, Uncle, for your time, Zeke said. Mike, Zeke, and Evan began to talk amongst themselves. I could tell they were distressed about coming all this way to find nothing. Mr. Emerson stepped towards me as he stared at my gold dove necklace. He handed me back the book, going deep into my eyes. I wanted to jump into his thoughts, as I could tell he knew something. He came in close, so only I could hear. I may not have written the second book, but if I did, maybe the Tree of Knowing would show you the answers you seek. He pointed at the cover. The Tree of Knowing. Why did that sound familiar, or feel familiar? And why didn't he tell her this? I stared at the cover. The closer I focused on the tree, the more the bark began to sparkle. An overwhelming amount of energy felt like it was flowing throughout my entire body. He leaned down to my ear and whispered, Take Mike and Zeke with you for this journey. Heal your heart, heal the world. My eyes opened wide and my jaw dropped. Did he just say what I thought he did? Before I could speak, an alarm went off on Mr. Emerson's watch. Oh, gotta roll, he said. I have a class to teach. It was nice meeting you all. Good to see you, Zeke. He dashed out the front entrance. Wait, I have questions, I shouted, but he completely ignored me. A few students sitting at the tables glared at me with disgust. For a brief moment, I forgot we were in the library. Sorry, I whispered to the students. He knew way more than he perceived. I should have just tapped into his thoughts. I was feeling defeated from this trip. I stuck the book under my shirt, and we left the library to discuss what was next. While the guys continued to talk by the library sign, a beautiful maple tree caught my eye. I took a deep breath, and the smell of fresh laundry lingered in the air. I stepped closer while staring at its paradise green leaves. The tree, the visions, what he said, something clicked in my head. I knew what we needed to do. I turned around and shouted at the guys, Hey, I know what we need to do. We are going to California.